From South Carolina Public Radio, this is the South Carolina Lede. I'm your host, Gavin Jackson, and this episode was recorded on April 22nd, 2025 from South Carolina Public Radio Studios here in Columbia. We know we're late. We thank you for bearing with us because this is, of course, our dedicated episode to the historic and unprecedented removal from office hearing for Treasurer Curtis Loftis for willfully neglecting his duties over the handling of the $1.8 billion discrepancy on state books, also known as the boondoggle that we've been talking about for several episodes. You guys know it. We know it well. We take you through all the machinations of that hearing, that historic hearing that took place in the South Carolina Senate on Monday, April 21st, with extended cuts and context that you will only find here. This is an exhaustive episode, so we're foregoing the wind down section. Now, while we are foregoing the wind down section, I want to briefly let you know that you cannot forego your duty. Please call us 803-563-7169. Give us something to talk about in the wind down when we get back on Saturday. Does it say no as I do? I can't call. I'm not allowed to. Now let's get into this. The historic hearing to remove embattled Treasurer Curtis Loftis took place in the South Carolina Senate on Monday. Don't call it an impeachment.
Okay.
Rather, it was a removal process hearing allowed under the Constitution if a statewide constitutional officer commits willful neglect of duty, which senators argued he did over his handling of the $1.8 billion accounting error that was revealed publicly after the former Comptroller General Richard Ekstrom had revealed a $3.5 billion double counting error that had been on his books for years. That was back in 2022 and 2023. Loftis was first elected to office in 2010, and he's been reelected every 4 years with the intention to run again next year, even if he's removed. Now, in both accounting cases with the Treasurer's Office and the Comptroller General's Office, there was technically no money missing, it was all on paper, and there has been no fraud detected either. But the issues, which festered for years, attributed to changes in accounting systems, reluctantly came to light and still have yet to be sufficiently resolved, despite the resignations of Ekstrom in 2023 and State Auditor George Kennedy earlier this year. Loftis, however, has remained defiant, despite the fact that all the transactions involved in this current boondoggle took place in his office and not the CG's office, and it took place in a hidden pass-through fund in which the errors were made under his watch. Now, throughout this process, there's been a lot of ups and downs, including a time in 2024 when Loftis attempted to reveal sensitive financial information that could have resulted in a crippling data breach and forced state leaders to scramble to prevent it from happening, to the point that SLED Chief Mark Keel showed up at Loftis' office. Now, this hearing on Monday reached a head after hours of testimony and hearings failed to supplant senators' concerns over the past several months. Last week, Loftis' team attempted to have the state Supreme Court intervene in preventing this historic hearing, but in a joint opinion issued last Thursday, the justices wrote, quote, "This matter is not yet ripe for the court's consideration," quote. And so the Senate gavelled in at noon on April 21st and transitioned into a committee of the whole, which allowed it to forego usual rules and procedures and facilitate the hearing, which went like this. 2 Senate presenters were given up to 1.5 hours to present their case to the body. Senator Larry Grooms, the Berkeley Republican who headed the Senate Finance Subcommittee investigating this problem, and Senator Stephen Goldfinch, a Georgetown Republican, acted as the special prosecutor on the case. But again, it's not even a case, it's not a trial, and he's not a special prosecutor. They were just presenting this to their fellow senators. Loftis and his team of 3 lawyers were then given up to 3 hours to respond and present their case. Following that, Grooms and Goldfinch had 30 minutes to respond, and then each member of the Senate, all 46 members of the Senate, were given the opportunity to question both sides for up to 10 minutes each. Only 16 senators did that, 8 Democrats and 8 Republicans. So let's go through this in order and start with some of the points Senator Grooms made to his colleagues.
Curtis Loftis had taken an oath to discharge the duties of office as state treasurer, and the main duty, the primary duty, the main reason we have a state treasurer is to maintain accurate and complete records of the Treasury. But doing so requires proper reconciliations of cash and investments that he has not done or cannot do. In 2012, 2013, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, the state auditor cited the state treasurer's office for significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, all related to incomplete or improper reconciliations of cash and investments. And in one report, the state auditor writes, it is probable that the magnitude of the difference in future years will have a material effect on the state's financial systems, on the state's financial statements. The outside independent firms of Malden and Jenkins and Alex Partners also report that the Treasurer's Office does not perform proper reconciliations. It is an undisputable fact that today the Treasury books are not accurate, they are not complete. And the big secret of Treasurer Loftis, the one that he's kept hidden away, is that there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in errors in the Treasury books today, and he doesn't know how to fix them.
Goldfinch, who is a lawyer by trade, hammered home on the cover-up he says Loftis propagated, the misinformation he said he actively spread, and the obfuscation by Loftis and his team, while not willing to own up to the errors he said were centered on ego and pride. Goldfinch here is elaborating on the attempt Loftis made last year to publish sensitive financial data.
The experts warned that providing so many identifying data points would give potential hackers more ability to triangulate and map their way to improper access. The treasurer reveals a dangerous combination of recklessness, misrepresentation, and disregard for his statutory and fiduciary duties. When confronted with a question about a legal requirement, he responded not with cooperation, but with hostility, false allegations, false accusations, alleging that the subcommittee directed him to release sensitive information when he knew no such request was ever made. It was done out of spite. Despite those clarifications and his own warnings about cybersecurity risk, he moved forward with plans to publish that data anyway, prompting urgent intervention from the chief of SLED, the governor, the director of the DOA, the subcommittee, and this chamber right here. These actions alone, if you didn't hear anything else that I said today, these actions alone show the extraordinary risk that his conduct posed and poses still to this day to the financial integrity of this state. When held accountable, the treasurer shifted tactics, accused the subcommittee of fabricating a letter and pointing to a second as evidence. That second letter was sent 2 hours later, and you've seen the evidence of that.
Once the senators wrapped up, Loftis's team had up to 3 hours to present. It started off with Deborah Barbier, who was briefly floated as being a part of President Donald Trump's second impeachment team. You might know that name because of that. And she started her presentation off with an image of Trump and Loftis projected on the screens in the Senate as she made her argument centered around due process, the core function of our judicial system in our country that has also been in the news recently.
If this can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. We are here not merely to defend a man and his honor, but to defend the very principles upon which our great state and our nation were founded upon. Principles that transcend politics, transcend personalities, and partisanship. We speak in the defense of a principle that predates this chamber, this state, and even this nation. The principle of due process of law. Embedded in both the United States Constitution and in our state constitution, due process is not a suggestion. It is not discretionary. It is an obligation, a constitutional command that ensures that no citizen, no elected official, no resident of this state is deprived of liberty, property, or reputation without a fair and an impartial process.
While Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Salvadorian citizen who lived in Maryland and was deported by the administration to a prison in El Salvador due to what the Trump administration called an administrative error, was not mentioned in any presentation, former despots like Zimbabwe's former long-serving president Robert Mugabe were evoked to show how they weren't afforded due process when being ousted from their disastrous and tyrannical reigns.
I think we can all agree that the standards we set for ourselves in the United States of America exceed that of Egypt, Pakistan, Burma, Thailand, Zimbabwe. These are examples of instances where leaders are ousted or politically neutralized without any semblance of due process.
Loftis also read remarks during the hearing presenting a coherent and concise picture of the issue in a way that many senators later said they wish they had first heard from him in subcommittee meetings. It would have prevented much of the brouhaha around the boondoggle itself. Here is Loftis.
Through it all, President Trump did not back down. He did not resign. He did not cave to pressure. He kept his mission. He stood before the American people and said, "They're not coming after me. They're coming after you. I'm just in the way." I'm inspired by President Trump, and I too will not back down. I realize my burdens are absolutely nothing like those of Martin Luther King, Alfred Dreyfus, and Donald Trump. But the lessons learned from their struggles are enlightening and encouraging. As I travel around South Carolina, and I've done a lot of that in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I find very few people of any party, of any race, and of any income status that believe this accounting error should cause a statewide election to be overturned. In fact, I've been overwhelmed and frankly very surprised by the positive attitude to this issue by virtually everyone that's outside the political bubble. A well-respected former Democrat senator said it best in a podcast last week, "It's a whole lot of nothing." And it's clear that most South Carolinians agree. His words remind me of why we're here, and I want to speak plainly about the most significant matter before us. The committee has alleged that I knowingly made false statements regarding the now widely discussed $1.8 billion accounting error, claiming I knowingly misrepresented it as cash in Skis Fund 0993. Let me be clear. That allegation is false. When I answered questions on April the 2nd, I relied upon documentation from the Comptroller General, the state's chief accountant, the state auditor, and our external audit firm, Clifton, Larson, and Allen, all of whom stated that the $1.8 billion was real cash and appropriately recorded in Fund 0993. These statements were consistent with the state's financial records, including the annual comprehensive financial report and the previous Senate subcommittee report of 2023. I answered in good faith with the best information possible. That information, as we've since learned from Alex Partners, was inaccurate. But my reliance on the Comptroller General's letter was appropriate and expected. As the state's treasurer, I'm entitled to rely on those financial records, including when we issue hundreds of millions of dollars of bonds and managing the $52 billion last night of public money. So clearly, relying on those records in a subcommittee hearing was appropriate. There was no intent to deceive, and furthermore, there was no reason to deceive.
And then Loftis's attorney, John Gasser, rounded out the 3-hour presentation with an extensive sports metaphor that in the chamber with some of the top pontificators in the state seemed to land completely flat. It was an Eagles reference too, so, someone on this podcast was stoked.
Go Birds.
But Gasser also made veiled digs at the senators, especially Republicans, who hold a supermajority in the 46-member chamber. Specifically how their primary voters will react to their ousting of the treasurer, who at one point was referred to as the most popular politician in the history of South Carolina.
And for all of you senators that represent a majority Republican district, the logic goes further. Over the last 4 election cycles, Almost every single one of you senators representing a majority Republican district, almost every one of you, your voters that voted for you to be their senator, to be their representative on this floor, in this chamber, voted for Curtis Loftis to be their state treasurer. How do you go back home to the citizens of your district and tell them, your vote for me, your vote for you to be their state senator matters. It is relevant. It will always be counted. But your vote for Curtis Loftis to be their state treasurer does not matter, is not relevant, will not be counted. How do you do that? How do you think the voters in your district would feel if an elected government official, through his or her agency, who had the power and authority, wanted to remove you from office, from this very chamber, without legal due process, without a fair and meaningful hearing, without credible evidence? How do you think your voters would feel?
Okay, so after their presentation was done, this is the point where there was another break, and then the Senate presenters were allowed to give a short rebuttal. Senator Goldfinch went in on the fact that Loftis did not bring the problem to lawmakers, a key issue here. He also went in on some of Gasser's arguments and how this hearing is not a court trial and does not have the same requirements.
I ask you this question. He wants you to think about this question. I do too. Was there a cover-up? Was there a cover-up? Did the treasurer have an affirmative duty to report the problem? Did the treasurer have an affirmative duty to report the problem? Think about that for a second. I've shown you the statute that he does, subsection 7. I've shown you the statute that he does have an affirmative duty to report. That legal team right there has shown you evidence that the treasurer's office knew about the problem going all the way back to 2016. I actually was surprised that they put one of those emails up, showing that they knew it wasn't cash going back to 2016, and yet he told us it was anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, when you have an affirmative duty to report something, a problem, you know you've got a problem and you refuse to report it, what's that called? What's that called? That's called a cover-up. That's called a cover-up, y'all. That's what this is. Now, Mr. Gasser hasn't had much of a chance to get to know me, but it's true that I was indignant. And if I was too indignant, I apologize. Members in here know that I get a little indignant when in the face of a bald-faced liar. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm a little indignant because I'm standing in front of a bald-faced liar. I don't hide behind the rules of professional conduct. I'm not scared of calling him a liar because that's what he is. In our jobs, in our duties, in our lives, it is incumbent upon us to stand in the face of people like that are bald-faced liars and call them out for what they are. That man is a master at misdirection. He's a master at obfuscation. You can call it whatever you want to call it. You know what it's really called? It's a lie. It's a lie. Ladies and gentlemen, as much as that legal team would like for you to believe, a government job is not a right. It's not a right. If it was a right, it would really require us to have a trial here today. It would require us to have due process and rules of evidence and rules of procedure and rules of court. It would require all of that. But guess what? It's not a right. And he doesn't own that seat. You know who owns that seat? The people of South Carolina own that seat. You know what the people of South Carolina gave us? They gave us a constitution that gives us the duty of oversight.
Then it came time for questions. Mind you, the Senate Finance Constitutional Subcommittee has taken more than 27 hours of testimony on this matter over 11 hearings and produced several exhaustive reports on the double counting errors of both the previous Comptroller General Richard Ekstrom, current Treasurer Curtis Loftis, as well as former Auditor George Kennedy. Senate Democratic leader Brad Hutto of Orangeburg was one of the 8 Democrats who asked questions during the question and answer phase. Hutto was direct with his questions, whereas the answers were a bit more drawn out.
Treasurer Loftis, I have 3 questions. You described this as an accounting error. Do you admit you made a mistake? Question number 2. Mr. Eubanks gave a very compelling timeline about how this all happened. Why didn't you tell us that years ago? Was it because you didn't know or you didn't want us to know? Number 3, if you did not neglect your duty, why are we now under SEC investigation that's going to cost us tens of millions of dollars?
The SEC is, the reason the SEC is here is because, and I have a letter that was sent to the Attorney General, was sent to the Comptroller General's office. He turned it over to the Governor and the Attorney General. And it said that the SEC has a non-public investigation of the state of South Carolina in reference to the overstatement of cash by $3.5 billion in the annual comprehensive annual report, ACVR. It has nothing to do with the state treasurer. And while it has been stated affirmatively over and over and over by the presenters, I'm not mentioned anywhere in there. Several offices have been interviewed. We haven't. Yes, sir.
You made a mistake?
Well, we make mistakes all the time. You got to tell me which one.
You admit it.
Well, which mistake you?
Well,
I'm not trying to be coy. There's about.
All right. Well, your Mr. Eubanks gave as great an explanation of the timeline as I've ever heard, but I've been waiting years to hear that explanation. And so my question is, did you not know that's what happened, or did you not want us to know that's what happened? Because that, to me, is, did you make a mistake? The mistake being either you didn't understand it, or you did understand it and you didn't want us to understand it.
I assume you're talking about the creation of the 0993 account?
Yes.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of facets.
I mean, we've been waiting for a long time to hear what he told us in about 10 minutes today.
Hindsight's pretty good. Okay, so the 0993 account was part of the conversion. It was a massive conversion. It was an ongoing process. The committee has it stopped on one day. That wasn't how it worked. We knew it would be a long-term process. I never knew that the 0993 had $1.8 billion in it, or it didn't have the $1.8 billion. It had $1.6 billion in appropriated dollars, which we don't deal with. And I found out about that in February of 2023, 1 month after Richard, or 2 months after Richard Ekstrom's.
Tell us about it.
Y'all knew about it before I did. It was in the Ekstrom report.
Okay, so that leads to the question of who's the treasurer here if we knew before you did? Isn't that something you should have known before we did?
The treasurer's office, how to say this? One of the problems I have, Mr. President, is this is all terribly complex. And if you want to cause troubles, you just make it very simple. And that's it.
Greenwood Republican Senator Richard Cash made the point that many did, focusing on how Loftis' staff knew about the issues with the conversion of the accounts from a previous accounting system to the new one called SCIS, dating back as far as 2016, whereas Loftis only apparently became aware of the problems in early 2023.
By March of 2018, they knew that the 2017 entries had not worked, and now we have this big problem. Whether it was 1.6 or 1.8 at the time, it's a big problem. Now, I think I understood you to say that you personally were not aware of the problem at that point in time, although I believe from everything I've read and studied that the Chief of Staff was. Is that correct? That you personally didn't know at the time, in March, or shortly thereafter, that we've got the $1.8 billion that's required
to get the skis to match up with the bank.
That's correct. I didn't know.
And so from reading these transcripts, I understand, and it's Alex's partner's understanding, that some of these entries are made with consultation with the Comptroller General's office and your office. I get that. They say there's shared responsibility here. There's no question about that. I think what troubles this body are several things. One, I find it incomprehensible that your senior staff wouldn't tell you about this big of a problem in a financial systems conversion, because the farther you get away from the problem, the harder it's ever going to be to try to figure out what happened. These things have to be investigated and dealt with at that point in time, and I think that's what the AP report says.
And we have this pointed line of questioning from Judiciary Committee Chairman Luke Rankin, an Horry County Republican, which of course included a reference to Shaggy.
Mr. Treasurer, and I don't relish standing up with a limited amount of time asking questions in a forum that you agreed to. Your attorneys negotiated with the Senate attorneys. Y'all agreed to this format. Yes or no?
Well, there wasn't a lot of agreeing, but I'm here, Senator.
We're here under
Yes, sir.
terms not set by me.
Yes, sir.
But definitely set by you, or more so than you. The reality for us, and Senator Cash mentioned it well, and Senator Stubbs, with everything that you market, it makes it so difficult for me to tell my neighbor today, riding out of my neighborhood, to explain to him how the only banker in South Carolina who represents himself as doing all these things for the good that you were charged, and God bless you for doing, but who cannot explain the most glaring, historically unprecedented fiscal FUBAR in South Carolina's history. And you're our guy. And you are doing just like Shaggy. It wasn't me. It's everybody but me. And maybe that's so, but it is so hard to defend, not in a criminal context, but in a, can he do the job? Help me, help us accept the responsibility.
Well,
if you did it.
Would you tell me what you want me to accept responsibility for? But because it's complicated.
Am I the chief banker? Accept this.
Yeah,
Am I the chief banker or are you?
I'm not the chief accountant, and that's the problem.
But you're the chief banker. And so when I'm talking to my constituent about my banker, the number one banker in South Carolina is looking to somebody else to figure out where's the money, that's pretty hard.
It was $1.6 billion of budget dollars, not real folding cash. We deal with folding cash. We don't deal with the budget dollars.
Senator Stubbs' predecessor. I mean, just do the money. Cash. You're saying it's cash. Your own record is saying it's cash, and I got interest. Look, I've generated interest.
Senator.
And I apologize. Yeah. Thank you so much.
But Senator, because the Comptroller General told me it was cash. You see,
told
we
Senator Fanning it was cash.
Because the Comptroller General gave me a letter.
After the senators concluded their questions, there was a brief recess called, at which point Senate Majority Leader Shane Massey was seen with a tally sheet polling senators ahead of the vote, which required a 2/3 vote of the chamber, which is a hard 31 votes, to move forward with the removal of Loftis. We were pushing up against 10 p.m. when the off-camera huddles had concluded, and it was clear there were enough votes, something Grooms and Goldfinch have insisted on for weeks. Mind you, 5 senators, Republicans Tom Fernandez, Mike Gambrell, and Mike Johnson, as well as Democrats Darrell Jackson and Kent Williams had leave, so they were down 5 senators. The roll call was called, and in the end, 33 senators voted for Loftis' removal, 2 more than needed, and 8 senators, all Republican, voted against the move. Those voting against it were Senators Sean Bennett, Wes Clymer, Tom Corbin, Greg Hembry, Shane Martin, Majority Leader Massey, Mike Rickenbach, and Jeff Zell. Following the vote, House Rules Committee Chairman Micah Caskey, a Lexington County Republican who watched the entire hearing, told reporters it's not clear what action the House will take on the matter. Remember, this has been an issue that House leadership has deferred to the Senate on the entire time, and this is something that needs to be done in the House as well if Loftis is to actually be removed from office. We have 9 legislative days left, so we will see what happens. Let's go to the socials, where on Facebook, Loftis said, quote, "Unsurprisingly, the Senate voted against us yesterday. We can all be thankful that the House of Representatives and the governor remain against this radical idea of overturning a statewide election without due process, but by political mechanism. Some good news is that record numbers of people are signing up to support my re-election campaign. Surprisingly, quite a few are non-traditional Republican voters, and that is a good thing," quote. Again, looking at the House, there are 88 Republicans and currently 35 Democrats in the 124-member House chamber. There's 1 vacancy in a seat that goes Democrat. A 2/3 vote of that chamber would equal 83. If you had all 35 Democrats voting against Loftis, you would need 48 Republicans to reach 83. And with that math, the show is done, my listeners, my beautiful, beautiful listeners. We gave you as much boondoggle as we could boondoggle in an episode. Will we continue on? That's a decision the House will make for us. And as always, thank you for listening to the pod. You can show us your appreciation by leaving us a review or voicemail at 803-563-7169. You can stay up to date with the latest news on scetv.org and southcarolinapublicradio.org. And don't forget to support your local newspapers. The South Carolina Lede is a production of South Carolina Public Radio. Our producer is A.T. Shire. Amy Crouch is our supervising producer. Sean Birch is our executive producer. This podcast is produced with support from PRX and is made possible in part by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, as well as listener contributions to the ETV Endowment of South Carolina. For the South Carolina Lede, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina.
It's sort of like Golem almost. Impossible. You just got to do a deep version of that, and that's almost Shaggy's singing voice. Impossible. Say it's coming on the shower.